Big crowd tonight. All right, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order with a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Paula, roll call, please.
Commissioner Corey?
Here.
Commissioner DePauw? Commissioner Dempster?
Here.
He is here.
Commissioner Kovacevic?
Here.
Commissioner Watts?
Here.
Vice Chairman Schlossberg?
Here.
Chairman Gray?
Here.
And did I hear Commissioner DePauw on the line?
Yes, I am here, Paula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to hear from you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item 3, call to the public. Paula, any speaker cards?
No, Chairman.
Are you sure, Farhad? All right, number 4, consideration possible action, approving the regular meeting minutes from May 8th, 2023. Commissioners' comments or a motion, please. Commissioner Dempster.
I would like to make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission, May 8th, 2023.
Commissioner Corey.
Second.
Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner DePauw.
Aye.
Thank you. You're spotlighted, sir.
7-0.
All right. Number 5, consideration and possible action on the annual report on the implementation of the Fountain Hills General Plan 2020. Farhad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. The reason this item is before you is because the Arizona State statutes requires, I beg your pardon. Let me start from the top. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission and the public. The reason this item is before you is because the Arizona State statutes requires each governing body of each municipality with a general plan to provide an update to the governing body, but also the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that's why I'm before you tonight to kind of give you a progress report, if you will, of some of the implementation items in the general plan and how we're progressing or how we're moving forward with them. But this is a particular focus on the 2022 calendar year. I know it's been about 6 months, but information has been coming in from various departments that are involved with some of the policies, goals, and implementation actions in the general plan, and hence the reason here we are just before the next fiscal calendar year presenting this before you. So real quick, the report reviews the adoption of the 2020 general plan, which is the current and effective general plan. The general plan covers 8 specific elements related to economic development, mobility, connectivity, public works projects, and parks and rec and the like. And as I said, this is to provide an overview of some of the implementation progress as of now, and hopefully we can generate some discussion. As I mentioned, the general plan was updated in 2020. That's an update from the 2010 general plan. And although it's been about 3 years since the 2020 general plan has taken effect, I think it's still a good idea to go over some of the differences between the two. So the current general plan focuses on neighborhoods, environment, and the economy. But more importantly, it looks at character areas instead of kind of looking at our inventory of specific land uses and how much is accounted for each specific land use. It also establishes procedures and requirements for the annual report. And again, the current general plan was approved by council in June, but it was ratified by the voters in November of 2020. So really, this is our 3rd year into the general plan, and I'll be providing some overview of how we plan on moving forward at the end of this presentation. So the general plan provides an implementation strategy, which is included in the last few pages of the general plan, the last several pages actually. And why don't I just jump over to one page of the general plan to give you an overview of how it's organized while using the previous slide as kind of a guide. But the implementation strategy, as I mentioned, it covers each element of the general plan. Here's a page from the thriving environment element, the built environment, connectivity, access, and mobility. So the goals are organized numerically in each section. Each goal has policies and implementation actions associated with them. There's a column here about the lead department and or agency that is responsible for implementing, or I should say primarily responsible for implementing the actions listed, and the anticipated time frame ranging from immediate to long-term. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, and also some additional comments and some of the players involved with each implementation action. So the annual report requirements, which are stated in the general plan but really are dictated by the state statute, is to provide you with a review of the planned amendments processed during the previous year, 2022, but I can tell you there have been none in that calendar year. Also provide progress and strategy for implementation, which is really what the report lists. It just discusses some of the accomplishments that have been made by each department relating to each general plan element. Also a review of some policy issues. None have been identified yet. And also some recommendations for amendments, and we have none to present before you today. But really what the report does is highlight some of the implementation actions that have been taken in the previous calendar year. By no means does it cover each goal under each general plan element, and really is just a small percentage of what's listed in the implementation strategy. But some of the things that are noteworthy are listed here. A couple of zoning ordinance text amendments that were approved that address the Thriving Neighborhoods plan include the additional provisions and limitations for guest houses and additions to or I should say primary residences, such as mother-in-law suites and other guest quarters in a primary residence. I highlighted briefly the sidewalk infill project along Saguaro Boulevard. A very significant gap has been completed over by around Rand Drive, where the commercial area is. The north leg of the the North Leg Trail has been completed, which is pretty significant because it's about a 4,000 foot trail between Eagle's Nest and Sunridge Canyon. The McDowell Mountain Preserve Trail master plan has been revised, and also the town online and permitting system that was actually launched back in 2021, but it's really helped us in moving forward a lot of these projects especially with regards to Park Place and some of the site design and design review applications that have been coming in. The Economic Development Department is working with the Arizona Office of Tourism, the various Indian communities to identify grant funding opportunities. And I've also listed in there multiple public works projects of significant, it's, I guess, to note that the town completed 390 lane miles of street sweeping and 290 square yards of preservative treatment, the majority of which is along Shea Boulevard in areas that were in need of considerable repair. But I mentioned the anticipated timeframes that are listed in the general plan. range anywhere from ongoing to long range. Now, I haven't concluded my report with any suggestions with regards to the policies listed there, and you know, and the fact that we may need to reevaluate some of these in the coming year, because, for example, the short range time frame applies to some of the implementation strategies that I spoke about earlier. Well, we're coming up on 4 years of the general plan, and it doesn't look like we have gone too deeply into some of these projects with regards to economic development, public works, not to single any department out, but in the coming year, we think we're going to reevaluate some of the policies in the direction that we would like to go, and come back to you about a year from now to discuss what the results of that reevaluation were. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and open up to questions or comments.
You might get off easy, Farhad. Commissioners, any questions of Farhad? Commissioner DePauw, any questions?
No, I do not have any questions at this time.
Thank you. So Farhad, are you looking for, you're not looking for any action necessarily, it's just informative?
Mr. Chairman, the only action, I guess you could say, we're looking for is, I guess, a motion to forward this over to the town council at their next meeting. And, you know, it's open to suggestions for revisions to the general plan as well. Or not the general plan, but the update.
Commissioner Corey?
No, I think it looks good, Farhad. So I'd like to make a motion that we forward the general plan annual report to the town council.
Commissioner Dexter?
I will second that motion.
All in favor of the motion to forward the plan to the town council?
Aye.
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 7-0.
Thank you, Paula. All right, agenda item 6, public hearing, consideration and possible action on 2304 to repeal and replace ordinance chapter 6. Mr. Wesley.
My expectation is this ought to go just as fast as the first item. Maybe not. Okay. All right, Chairman, Commissioners, good evening. We will continue our review of the sign ordinance. We began back in April with a review, but again, just a little bit of background. Town Council, after some review and discussion, directed the staff and P&Z Commission to look at the sign ordinance based on some comments and suggestions they had for possible amendment, and go through this text amendment process through the public hearings to bring back to them then some recommended modifications along the lines of what they were thinking, in particular looking for opportunities in the code to be more business friendly and allow businesses to provide more signage to help customers find them and take advantage of the things they offer. We did have again, a discussion back in April with a draft that included a first round attempt to include in it what the council had identified as possible changes and a few things that staff had identified. We had a very good discussion at that meeting. And so with that, I have gone into what was the draft you saw in April and adjusted that with what I had as takeaways from your April discussion as possible recommendations to take back to the town council, but again, subject to your ongoing discussion this evening. So we're going to go through the sections of the ordinance here and see what those changes are and what additional comments you have and where I need to continue to make modifications. So section 601 of the ordinance introduction, there were no changes identified previously, and still no changes suggested, so unless somebody on the commission has identified something in section 601. We can move on to 602. In section 602, it provides the definitions that are used in the ordinance, and with Then here we have a definition of each of the sign types. It was suggested that we add here a reference to section 6.08, where we then provide the regulations associated with each of those sign types. So a person that might just look at the definitions and think that's all there is would know they need to go on into 608 to really find the details. So I gave an example here on awning or canopy signs, similar thing then with each of the other sign types. I didn't go ahead and list them all out here. Any questions, comments, changes there? In section 603, which deals with building permits and fees, there is a statement in here with regard to whether a building permit is needed, and it says no building permit for temporary signs, but then it says except banner signs. And going back and reviewing this, well, there isn't a building permit required for banner signs, so there's a banner sign, and we didn't want there to be confusion, so the suggestion is we take out this except banner signs here so that, again, there's no confusion. It's a building permit that's needed for a banner sign. Any questions, concerns about that one? See, this is so easy. Section 604, no proposed changes to the penalties or the violation penalty section. Section 605, enforcement and remedies, no proposed changes in that section. Section 606, sign plans, no proposed changes in that section. Section 607, general regulations, so it covers a lot of different topics within the sign code. We have just a few things here that we're suggesting for modification. This first one in section 607B1. This talks about temporary signs in the right-of-way because of some changes that are being made elsewhere to allow more signage in the right-of-way. It seemed like it would be helpful to adjust the wording here a little bit to make sure there were no conflicts with the understanding that indeed there are places where signs will be allowed in the right-of-way. Any questions, concerns about this language?
Chairman.
Commissioner Watts.
John, in 1B1A, where it says common area can be used for signage for any occupancy within the condominium.
Right.
Does that mean we can have 100 signs out there if there's 100 condos?
So yes, within the condominium project itself, the condominium unit is only inside the walls. And so if you're a business in a condominium, in order to put something outside your business, allows for that.
So this is commercial only, not residential, when it says condominium.
So this would apply also to residential. So I guess I should back up. When you say 100, 100 would be based on there being 100 units.
Yes.
It depends upon the type of signage, because there are individual limitations depending upon the type of signs, how many there can be.
I think as I read through this, that became kind of a theme that in our effort to make it more business friendly, it now seems to open up Pandora's box, and we can have in a commercial, and we'll get to it eventually, multiple signs. And you have this proliferation of signs where I think it's going to be ugly as heck.
Chairman, Commissioner Watts, that's definitely a balance we're going to need to be discussing this evening. I've got several points along that line that I'll be bringing up later. This specific language is not being proposed for change. Maybe it does need to be looked at a little closer based on some of the other language that we talk about. So maybe we want to put this, aside for the moment and possibly come back to it, because I can see where you're headed with it. Maybe there needs to be some statement here about number.
Well, I think either the number and or the time limits, I think both of them, because with this proliferation of signs, how long are they allowed to be up and how many and to what degree? So that was, and that was one.
Right. So this particular provision really just deals with the fact that by the start of this statement, you can only put your sign on your property.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a condominium, there's no place to put it except inside your unit, which doesn't do any good. So it's just clarifying that you can't put it outside your unit.
That's how
all this provision does.
That's how I read this.
But later we talk about numbers and
Okay.
sizes and times and so forth. So
And then in B, could you help me understand where it says two areas, commercial and industrial developments that have multiple properties? I'm not clear on what that means, but not on the same property as the sign.
Because that's any type of group commercial center, such as over here at the Bashes.
Okay?
You've got multiple businesses, but only one property. And so for them to have signs, that needs to go on that common property and not on their individual unit.
Okay, so when I get to the last sentence where it says, but not on the same property as the sign, that to me seems confusing. And maybe it's just me not reading the entire sentence to you, but.
So again, another example that maybe applies to this one a little bit more would be the Target Center, where you have multiple property owners because it's been subdivided. And so you can have that common Target sign out front that advertises the different businesses on their monument sign, but it's only on one of the properties, it's not on all the properties. So again, it lets you have that sign without it being considered an off-premise sign.
Are those, is the Target property actually owned by separate individuals, or isn't?
There are 3 or 4 different properties there. I can't remember how many, but there's more than one.
But common area within the parking lots?
Right.
So could they put the signs in the easement between the road and the parking lot where it is a easement or right-of-way?
So this is not allowed on the right-of-way. This is still on property, private property. The sign typically wouldn't go in an easement, but it does allow the one sign to advertise businesses that are on that property because it's developed as a joint center.
Okay, so I understand the pendant sign where you've got a listing of all the different properties and
Right.
the size of the pendant. But there could be other signs out there that could be on that property somewhere?
So it allows for, through a sign plan, to allow for the common street frontage monument sign, is what it says. So it is talking about just the monument sign in this paragraph.
Just the monument sign?
Right, that's what it says, to allow for common street frontage monument signs. So it's not just any sign scattered around the property, it is the monument sign that this provides for.
So they are precluded, all the tenants are precluded from being able to have any kind of A-frame sign or anything easement right away other than the monument sign?
No. This allows for the monument sign. The temporary signs are handled separately, as we'll talk about later when we get to them.
And I think that's where my confusion comes in, because it's not necessarily conflicting, but if I go to different areas, that it becomes challenging to understand each of the components. And so I'll be patient for a while.
I mean, ultimately, are you trying to get to a place where if there's a monument, then the temporary is not permissible?
Not necessarily. My concern is, just like in the condominium scenario, that the proliferation of signs becomes overwhelming. And so you have all of these different types of signs that are allowed that are going to degrade the aesthetics of the property. I get, that's my bigger concern, and it's an overriding concern throughout, that we don't have some mechanism, either time or number, that we can control the number of signs so it doesn't look like billboards, A-frames, post, all of these different types that we have exclusions throughout here. To me, it gets very confusing, and again, I hope we get to that, but that seemed to be an overriding theme both on the residential side and the commercial side.
It's almost like I mean, you're almost back to the original intent of the ordinance that was on paper, right? I mean, that's where you're...
It's gone from one extreme to the other.
Right.
And now we can do, in order to accommodate businesses, we can do, we're recommending we can do anything.
Yeah, Commissioner Dempster.
I wanted to make a comment with residential condominiums, most, if not all, HOAs, that common area, they don't allow signs per each resident. So like, for example, a for sale sign you can't put in the common area in condominiums. So there may be several cases where an HOA will be more restrictive.
So then maybe we have to weave in somehow, except as dictated by the HOAs.
Well, the HOA rules would trump the town rules. The town is saying it's okay, but if the HOA says it's not okay, then it's not okay.
But do we want to acknowledge that in our stipulations or our recommendations?
Chairman, Commissioner Watts, while what Commissioner Dempster says is true, it's totally up to the HOA to enforce their rules. We can't do that. And so it's kind of that ongoing relationship we have with HOAs in a variety of ways. So I don't know if there's anything to do in our ordinance that would highlight that.
Okay.
Commissioner Corey?
Just one comment on the industrial development with the sign plan and the monument sign. I can understand what this is saying. So the monument sign is just going to basically maybe have the name of the business, whereas the additional sign would be their opportunity to market whatever they're doing, if there's a special or something, right? So, and they won't have the opportunity to maybe change the face of the monument sign. That's just telling you that that business is there. So I can see the value in having the two different ones. I just wanted to share that perspective. Right.
I can certainly understand the perspective, but I don't know that I agree with it, because if everybody can put out these A-frame signs, then again, you've got, without some constraint about time or number, then you have, I put it out there because I can't change the monument sign. So how do we accommodate that? Or do we just say, okay, we've accommodated what council wanted, which is make it business friendly, and wait and see what happens?
But I think the monument signs are more like directional wayfinding kind of sign, whereas the temporary sign is for a temporary sale or advertisement of some sort.
As long as you can define temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you have a 20% off sale every day.
Yeah.
All day.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
I mean, you're back to the original intent
Exactly.
of the decluttering exercise, and we've swung the pendulum all the way to, we want to be all things to all businesses. The balance is, in my opinion, it's closer to where you are, but I also understand Commissioner Corey's position, which is more aligned with the, with how we got back here.
understanding is one thing, and accommodating is something else. So while I understand Commissioner Corey as well, I understand the words, I understand the wording. I'm concerned about the blight that unintentionally is created by the unregulated signs that can be placed virtually anywhere because they're temporary. With that, I'll make it easy again.
Paula?
So, Commissioner Watts, thank you. I mean, that's going to be the key thing that we're going to have to noodle through this evening and see. I've picked some numbers, kind of based on where the council came from, when I was hearing from the commission last time, to give us a place to start. They probably need to be adjusted up and down, whatever as you see as we discuss them. So we get on into some of the details. So, and we will be getting there soon. So going on in section 6.07, there's a couple of the things that we had in here. We talked about these last time. Because of the confusion and conflict between our local ordinance and state statute when it comes to political signs, signs put up during election season, we thought it might be helpful to add this number 3 in 607B2I that would then exempt the prohibition to allow signs per state statutes during elections, but not in the sign-free zone. It really doesn't change anything. Hopefully it just helps clarify that if we need it at some point in the future. And then on down, amending the provision that currently says signs are prohibited in the Shea Road right-of-way. That's still true, but except as specifically provided in this chapter. So we'll see when we get down into A-frames and yard signs, that there are provisions in commercial areas to allow them, but only in those commercial areas.
John, I know that this isn't going to go through this way, but if I read that correctly, the addition of 3 and 6.07, I'd prefer that those remain, unless there's a statute that says they can't, I'd prefer to recommend that those remain clutter-free. I think that's one of the innate benefits of our landscape, are those sign-free zones, even during political season.
Right. And so, let me get back here and find that. Okay. So I can put it back in context. So prohibited locations, signs are prohibited in the following locations. They're prohibited in town rights-of-way. And then within projecting over the right-of-way, except as allowed by state statutes and the town's sign-free zone. So the town's sign-free zone is still there, and you still can't put them in the town's sign-free zone, but you could put them other places in the right-of-way, which would otherwise be excluded.
Okay, so that's not a carve-out that allows it during political season?
So, no, in the political season, that's the only time the sign-free zone
Exists.
really applies.
Okay.
And so during the political season, you still can't put them in the sign-free zone, whatever that is, but otherwise you can put them in the right-of-way.
And just a question for clarification, I'm sorry if this is a silly question. Where is the town sign-free zone?
We're going to see that map a little bit later,
Okay, thank you.
if you'd like. We can go there now if you really want to, but it's going to be more important, I think, later. I think it's going to be more important later, but we can look at it now if you really want to. But
I may have another silly question, but does zoning have enough enforcement personnel with as creative as the sign ordinance could be?
we are going to discuss that.
Oh, it's yet to
You'll
come?
get deputized to.
Great.
So, Chairman, Commissioners, particularly when we get down and talk about, I think, the yard signs and what used to be garage sale signs, the off-premise residential directional signs, that's where it's really going to come up, and how we treat those and how it interplays with these others and allowances for right-of-way and times. That's where I'm really going to discuss that in detail, which is basically at the end. But it's important to keep in mind as we go through all these. So also, just a couple of housekeeping things for clarification in 607, for consistency with other provisions, adding in this chapter, and then in 12, taking off the except as specifically permitted, because it's not specifically permitted any place for you to put a sign on somebody else's property. So then we get into 608, and that's where all the real meat is of the specific regulations. And 608A addresses individual sign types. Again, the goal from the town council was to try to better meet some of the business's sign needs. So the first one is the A-frames and T-frames. Council direction was to allow them in the right-of-way in commercial areas, including Shea, allow them to be displayed some distance from the actual property being advertised, and allow for more than one per business. So here's the regulations as currently proposed. So when we allow for 2 signs per business is what is being proposed, at 1 per public entry, but up to maximum of 2. The maximum sign area for any one sign is still 6 square feet, and then an aggregate sign area of 9. So if you have one at 6, you could have another one at 3. You could have one at 4 and one at 5, that type of thing. But no sign bigger than 6, and an aggregate, if you do have 2, of 9 square feet. Last time we...
So,
go.
well,
Okay.
before you leave that,
Okay.
I was trying to let it go. Before you leave that, do we need to introduce a separation, minimum separation distance, so that you can't stack 2 signs right on top of each other to get to your 9?
We could.
I mean, that's the intent, right, is you got two entrances, you're coming from north and south, and you can hit it from both sides.
Yes, that would be the general idea. You have the two entrances, you have one front and one back in the Plat 208 area,
That's
for
not how
example.
that will be
And-
utilized.
But yes, there's nothing here that wouldn't keep you from putting them both, one on each side of the door or wherever, so they're basically on top of each other. So any suggestions on what a minimum separation
I mean,
distance should be?
if to follow the spirit of that, then maybe it's either introduce language that says, I don't know, in support of wayfinding, but then exclude direct adjacency, or just simply say that the signs should not be visible from one another, or just say one sign per business and be done with it.
Maybe one sign per side.
Per elevation.
Yeah, or per, however you word that, yeah.
So let's go ahead and jump into a challenge.
We like challenges.
So as we're going to talk about in a moment, as the council wanted us to consider, is that you could locate a sign some distance from your property. We talked about that in some detail last time. And I showed you several maps of different scenarios around town and what some of those distances might need to be. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit more specifically in a moment. And so with that, the sign you're putting out may not actually be in front of your business. It might be in front of a business, you know, some distance away down at the corner. So that's one challenge. And then also, since we can't read the sign to regulate it, if there are two signs right in front of your business that are 10 feet apart, and our regulation says you have to have them 20 feet apart, one sign is really yours and one sign is really somebody else's, how do we then enforce that? Because the sign may actually say, I like whales, and doesn't really identify a business that we go to and say, hey, your sign needs to move. So if we talk about separations here, if you're going to have two signs, got to be at least so far apart, it may be challenging to actually enforce such a provision.
So take that in reverse. I had the same comment that I did last time on this. I think we're trying to be too much to too many scenarios. And a sign, and that was all based on the technology drive and that whole area, right?
That was part of it, yes.
My thought there is the same. If you're standing up a business and it's in the technology district back behind the Target Plaza, then you chose to stand up your business in that location because it wasn't a high prominence, high traffic, foot traffic location. Why should we extend the sign ordinance to provision wayfinding to your place of business? I don't think that we should. And so I think then once you tie a bow on that, then I think you're back to if there's a need to have multiple signs, then it needs to be per elevation, or at least not in direct adjacency. Commissioner Dempster.
I just thought of if, like your example with I like whales, how would code enforcement be able to do their job if they didn't know who belongs to those signs? So do all our signs need a label of the name of the business or the contact person so they can do their job if needed?
Chairman, Commissioner Dempster, so that is a possibility if I understood what you're saying. I mean, we can't make the sign itself say anything, but we could, and we've done this before, require a permit for every temporary sign, and they had to put that permit on the sign, and we could use that to potentially help with enforcement. I wasn't here before when we did that sign permit process. I'm told it was, however, a very big challenge and was eventually done away with because the challenges outweighed the benefits at the time. It may be different today, but that may be where we would need to go if we continue down some of these routes in terms of numbers and locations.
I'm in agreement with Commissioner Dempster, but as far as the regulation, if we don't have a mechanism to control this. We can put the distances, we can put whatever we want as far as the codes go, but much like EPCOR, the technology's out there. The technology to scan, to have an RF frequency that comes off of your meter or off of your sign or your sticker as a code enforcement drives by and they have a legend that they're looking at on their computer and they see that somebody is out of date, maybe we give them 90 days and just arbitrarily 90 days on a sign, and it's out of compliance, they stop, they advise. They know who pulled the permit. And I know that, boy, is that draconian when you say all of a sudden, and I think, well, I wasn't part of the previous sign requirements for permits. I can see how it can be problematic if we don't have a mechanism that's easy, not only to do online, much like our building permits are now, but also for code enforcement and for people to understand it. So I think we're getting the cart in front of the horse to some degree if we don't have that mechanism.
Okay. And that's certainly something we can spend more time before we come back again, is fleshing out what a permit procedure might be like. So before we had several maps of possible distances that might happen from a business to allow something out in a right of way, some distance from the business. And we had the one for commercial and one for industrial. In your packet, this is the solution that I came up with. But as I thought about it some more today, putting this presentation together, I came up with a different solution. So one of the concerns is, as you see here, if you can go 1,200 feet from a lot line to a street, doesn't mean necessarily down the street, even though I tried to do that by using the term front street. It could actually allow you to get quite some distance away to other streets that maybe we're not interested in. So I'm proposing something slightly different now, but again, looking for your feedback for additional modifications. So the proposal now for that section is, in all commercial industrial zone areas, you can place that A-frame sign in the right-of-way adjoining your property. So that's right there in front, wherever that may be. If you're in a commercial zone area, you also may place it up to 90 feet from the property corner at the right-of-way line, measured along the right-of-way without crossing a street. So that keeps you going down that same street and not being able to jump over property like is shown here. And a similar thing then with the industrial, but with the 1225, which again gets you from, this is working. So that gets you again from this last property here down to here, along the right-of-way without crossing a street, but wouldn't allow you to do any of those types of things.
Is a T intersection crossing a street?
So in this case, if this were a street, you couldn't go any further than right there. But in this case, it's an alley. So you could still go all the way down to here. But yes, if that were a T intersection, you couldn't cross the street to go on down to that next corner.
And if you were to go north,
so
you were on the, yeah,
you still, this corner property could still come all the way up here. But that's the only one.
Now, the other challenge with being this liberal with this kind of policy is you're going to end up with signs in front of other businesses that are in no way related to that business. I just don't like this at all. I mean, and I think that if you rent space in one of those industrial suites, you rented it there for a reason. I don't think we should do this. figured you'd have something to say.
I just see the same exact thing that you're talking about. If you go down technology today, there's A-frames, all kinds of signs up and down that road. And I'm probably making it more exaggerated than I need to be, but there's a lot of different types of signs there in addition to the monument signs. And I think even with the footages, the distances you've got lined out here, personally, I would gravitate towards the corner. That's where I've got the most traffic, the most exposure. And that's where if I was a business, I'm going to that corner. I'm going to figure it out how I can get there. So I think you're going to have this concentration of signs that are not going to be consistent. They're not going to be a monument sign, and they're going to create a mess.
And oh, by the way, you're not going to pick it up at night.
Oh, didn't even think about that. So yeah, they're going to be out there forever, without a time and distance and some mechanism. So we're going back to the mechanisms. All of this could be doable, but the mechanism isn't in place for enforcement.
But we do have that they have to be picked up at the end of the day, right? That's.
Says the one code
Well-
enforcement guy for the whole town.
2.5. 2.5. 2.5. So the code does require that if you put it in the right-of-way, it has to be taken down. It can be put out at official sunrise, taken down at official sunset, but if it's on your property, no, it doesn't.
And what's the fine for not picking it up?
Confiscation of the sign, or I think it starts at a $50 fine. It's been a while since I've looked at the fine structure, but there is a fine structure that goes with it, and it escalates based on.
So we're going to be able to afford 4 or 5 more zone enforcement people pretty readily.
The exception to that was in the town center area, where you could leave them out in the right-of-way, in the pedestrian area. So I've
I
heard
mean,
some-
I would just lobby hard to have that section almost struck. That
Okay. Is there anybody want to argue the other way? I'm looking for some consensus here as I work on a modification. I don't want to go this way and come back and have push to go back another way. But what I'm hearing is that mostly is concern that we've gone to too much signage, particularly without any mechanism to help with the enforcement.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, the concentration just going to become overwhelming, and it's just going to look worse. So unfortunately, I agree with Chairman that you picked Technology Drive. You knew what the monument signs were there. The consequences of your action are not my responsibility necessarily, so I need to contain it to make sure that the town is protected as opposed to the individual businesses.
Okay. And just by the way, from all the different examples we looked at, I felt like this one was probably the most compelling as far as if we're going to come up with a distance for the commercial. Again, you may not like it, maybe it's too much, but from all of them, this seemed the most compelling, so that's why I used the 130 feet in that one. Although I think with this one, with this different way of doing the measurement, I reduced it to 90. Moving on.
Before we move on, John, when we go back up to, I believe it was item 1 above, where it says in single-family and multifamily districts, and that's again where I think that the concentration, and maybe you're going to get to this too, but the concentration is if I've got multifamily and I've got 20 units and I can put 2 signs per some number, I'm going to have 40 signs out there. So I'm going to voice that same concern about density and how we're going to contain that, same thing.
And so A-frames are only allowed in the single and multi-residence when used as the directional sign for the garage sale or the open house. Otherwise, they're not permitted.
How does that apply to multifamily?
Multifamily zoning can still have some type of multifamily zoning can again include condominium projects where people have individual ownerships. And there can be, and they also include uses such as churches that might be in them, that might have events that go on that would use those, what we have called weekend directional signs.
So do some condominiums actually sell the land, or is it generally held as common?
The land's common.
It's always common?
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the definition of a condo.
Okay.
So the last piece, we've already pretty well discussed it in terms of the A-frames, and when they're placed in the right-of-way, cannot be located on a sidewalk. That was one of the concerns with the earlier draft. So change that to be just in the town center area, that it could be on a sidewalk, 4-foot clear passage. And again, the last provision shall be removed between sunset and sunrise versus when a business is closed. And can't modify or damage the landscaping. Moving on to banner signs, another one we had a lot of discussion about last time. So proposed several changes to what we looked at before. Again, I think get a little closer to what the commission was looking for. Before we had some discussion about 90 days and waivers for non-residential uses in residential districts and so forth. It was kind of confusing. So, and what I wrote in the staff report was different than what I attached if you compared those two. And I realized I grabbed the wrong ordinance that I attached as far as this provisions. So this is what was actually in the report and what was intended. So you could have a banner sign through a permit for a maximum of 120 days per calendar year, but no more than 30 days at a time. And then you can also then apply for the administrative temporary use permit that you can apply for today. So if you are that special use, that, again, most common example is a church in the residential zone that has lots of different seasonal activities. If this hasn't caught it for you, you could apply for that temporary permit. And the other main discussion was for the new business. I went ahead and went with a calendar year versus, we've talked about everything from 180 days to 70 to the full year. I went ahead and went with the full year. And then we have discussion about that becoming tattered, torn, or the need to change the message because maybe they started off with just grand opening. Well, 6 months later, they don't still need to be saying grand opening. And so must be made in good repair and does allow them to change it up to 4 times a year. They may start off with a sign that just says their business name and stays in good repair and there's no need to change it. If that's the case, then they wouldn't have to. But this allows them to if they need to, which is a little bit tenuous because now we're reading the message to some degree, but we think it's okay.
Yeah, just one thing that I noticed, and you may have corrected it with what you just said, but in the, where you have all of the changes listed, it says here that it is a maximum of 90 days per calendar year, 4 times a calendar year.
Right. That's the one that I corrected to this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I corrected it someplace, and I wrote the staff report with the correction. But I guess it never got it corrected in the actual copy of the ordinance so it's attached to the.
Because the way that reads
report.
is like all year, pretty much. Okay.
Clearly. So I'm not a fan of additional days may be approved through a temporary use permit. I think particularly when it's an administrative function, it should be black and white. If you can't manage your own schedule for the year, and I don't know one organization that doesn't have a schedule, and utilize 120 days, having gone from 30 days, something's wrong. And you may have an extreme exception, but that's pretty ambiguous, and in being an administrative issue, I'd be dead set against that.
To your point, Commissioner, that's 10 times a year you could have it up for 12 days at a time. That's for every month for 10 days a month. That quite a bit of usage right there off the top, so you're right. Anybody object to striking that out?
I have a general question. So what's to say that if we get this pretty good and they approve it, that if we find out that some of these are bigger issues than we discovered, then we can revisit this again in the future?
Oh, yes.
Right, okay.
Either like recycling the same text amendments over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, post and board signs, otherwise known as for sale signs. Couple of issues here. Go to this one first, although it's second in the ordinance itself. This is one that came up. Commissioner Dempster brought it up last time. The current code does not allow most post and board signs or for sale signs to be in the right-of-way. Traditionally, they are. You're putting that sign out so people driving down the street can see it. And so the proposal was that we amend the code to go back to allow them within the public right-of-way. So that's a simple piece there. But as I was working on that piece, I was thinking about the number, and this idea of condominium units. And the thing that we see mostly with regard to condominiums is the duplex. They got built, and now the owner wants to come back and divide it into condominiums. And so you've got two units owned separately with a common area out in front. And so if both units want to be sold at the same time, and we limit you to one post and board sign to your property, one of the two gets to put the for sale sign out there and the other one doesn't. And so that's what kind of drove thinking about, well, how can we address that type of situation for a post and board sign? And so I came up with some numbers, certainly subject to your review and consideration and adjustment as you see fit. But if you have 1 to 5 dwelling units on a property, that you can go ahead and have one post and board sign per unit, whatever that sign's used for. If you've got 6 or more, okay, that's starting to get big enough for you. Again, you probably do have that property owners group like Commissioner Dempster was talking about. It's going to probably take more interest and active control of what's happening in that common area and put a little bit more limit on how that might happen. And so reduced it at that point to then just 2 signs for the property per street front. And then when you get back into the non-residential use, it's what we have today in terms of 1 sign per property per street front.
John, I don't know that solves the problem for a duplex versus a condo, because we have that situation right now going on. There's a duplex on Westby, both sides A and B are for sale, and I believe the other one's on Chama, so both sides are for sale. In the Realtor world, I know the town zoning might recognize the duplex as a condominium, but we look at it as kind of 2 separate, if it is, if they've been condominiumized and are 2 separate entities, 2 separate units, 2 different people own them. And then typically they do maintain their own front yard. It's not like an HOA association has, rarely are there a lot of CC&Rs as well, versus a condominium complex where you do not maintain the exterior, you do not have a yard, you don't have anything to worry about on the exterior, nor is there an expectation that you have, versus that duplex where you are responsible for the maintenance and everything. So I understand what you're trying to resolve, but.
So should the first category just be two, no more than 2 units?
Can you
Versus-
separate out duplexes from condominiums? Because I think that would resolve it.
Well, it's still a condominium.
They're
I mean, 'cause
in
if you are-
condominiumized, but
If you are just a duplex, one owner owns all the building, all the lot, that's different than the condominium where you do have the 2 separate unit owners.
can we spell it out? A duplex where there are 2 separate owners?
But, yeah, that's a
Yeah, it is
condominium plat.
well, there would be 2 separate plats, though. There may not be common area.
Everything outside of the unit is a common area, whether it's limited or limited common or straight common, it's all common. And the condominium association, through the declarations, has responsibility for that.
A duplex wouldn't necessarily be a condominium.
Right, not necessarily.
I think it's the wording that confuses me, the condominium versus duplex. Initially, when you have a duplex, you have a common ownership on the land. When you divide it, what do you call it at that point? Are they single-family attached? Does it no longer have the designation as duplex? What are they called?
They're
And
condominium,
Condos.
Okay,
condominium,
but earlier we talked about that the land is common.
right?
So is it still common or is it divided now?
It's common in a
So-
condominium.
So then you've got to stick with, it's a duplex and I can only have one sign
Right.
on the property, period.
Correct. But if it's condominium, you condominiumized it, so you have now units that are owned separately, you can still have one per unit.
Is that assuming the same ownership and it's a
They're
rental?
Typically, they're different,
They're different.
typically. I mean, somebody might buy both parts of it and rent one and live in one, but
I think the wording is confusing, and I think to Commissioner Dempster's point, if we can somehow clean it up to make it clear, either that or I've got to go take a real estate class, one of the two. Maybe I should.
you're stuck here anyway, so you might as well do something.
I mean, the duplex could be a condominium, it could be fee simple with each side owning their half of the lot and,
So if they actually own the property, that would be a attached single residence or a townhome
Right.
type situation where they own the land, then we're still at one sign per property because the properties are separate even though the building's joined. And so that works with this. Or if it's a condominium where they just own the inside of their unit, but the ground is owned in common, then each unit owner may need to be able to put a for sale sign out in front because they are individually selling their unit.
Right.
So this covers that ability. If we don't have this, then it's one per lot. And those unit owners got to fight it out, see who gets to put their sign out there.
that doesn't happen very often, I wouldn't think.
Probably not.
Because the minute they sold, they build a duplex, they're renting it out, they're doing something with the other unit, whatever. But the minute they go to sell, they have to either subdivide it or condominiumize it. Otherwise, what are they selling?
They're either selling the property as a whole, the building and the property as a whole, or they have somehow subdivided it, correct, to be able to sell pieces.
I just don't, I don't see a situation where the two units are for sale from different owners without it either being a condominium or each unit being fee simple.
Right? Right.
So we should be good, right?
Now, when you have multiple owners in one building who have right to their individual piece of that building, can sell it independently, And we're trying to provide for them to be able to provide that signage for them to independently sell their unit. And if more than one unit owner is wanting to do that at the same time, for them to each be able to put their sign out. If we just leave it at one per property, then the individual unit owners, whoever gets their sign out there first, that's it until that sign's taken down.
That's a piece that I can't, how does 2A and 2B not set us up for some sort of disenfranchisement? If I'm the number 2 owner to want to sell under 2A, how can the town tell me I have to wait to put my post and board sign
That's what
out?
they were trying to cover that, so you don't have to wait. We're giving you the allowance so that you can have more than one if you're a condominium project. And
Oh,
you're the
one
only-
per, okay, I read that wrong.
One per property or per condominium unit.
Okay. And so then it's only applicable under 2B, because the way that reads, and then I turn around and apply that to 2A. So 2B says 6 or more dwelling units on a property, 2 signs per property. So should that also say or condominium unit?
So at this point, coming back to again what Commissioner Dempster has said, you're more likely to have some type of overall management company, organized owners association that's likely to not allow you to do that. It's also less likely you're going to have that many selling at one time. Again, these numbers are arbitrary. Maybe the first one should just be 1 or 2, and that's as far as it should go, or maybe there should be 3 categories here of somehow breaking it out. But at some point, you do get large enough, you're going to have that ownership association that's probably not going to let you do it, and we wouldn't want that many signs anyway, cluttering up the place should it happen. Because I'll go ahead and throw this out again. While the traditional use of a post and board sign is for sale or for rent, once we give you the allowance, you can put that sign on your property and it can say anything you want it to say, and it can be there for a long time. So again, we don't want to get too crazy with this, but trying to cover what I see as at least enough of a potential to consider. Because as I mentioned, we see a lot of these, and we have a lot of these duplexes in particular in town that are condominiumized. And it just seems possible that you could have both units trying to be sold at one time. Without something like this, they couldn't each put out a sign.
Go ahead. Okay.
Do we have a definition somewhere of a condominium, duplex, single family, or is that codified somewhere?
So how much is specifically in our ordinance, I'd have to go back and see, but in the industry, they're understood terms.
Well, I understand that they're understood, and I'm trying to follow what you're saying, but I think the wording is what has confused me, because I don't have a definition of each of those in front of me. And I pity the zoning guy that's got to, understand all of this. If we don't elaborate on what it is and maybe reduce it to 1 or 2 for duplex, and then more from that point with a stipulation and a clarification of what a duplex is, what a condominium is, so it's clear, rather than, I've read this numerous times and I'm still befuddled by it.
Maybe a picture.
Thanks.
I just have one other thought, and I'm not convicted by it either way, but on the previous slide, you changed the distance from the curb to be 2 feet. I'm just wondering, should that be the height of the sign versus 2 feet in the event it lays over out into the street? Susan's probably going to disagree with me, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. Because the reality is a post and board sign is what? The arm on it's 18 to 24 inches, so 2 feet means it's hanging at the curb. If it goes over, it's in the street.
So the face of the sign or the edge of the sign has to be 2 feet back, so then your post is another 2 to 3 feet back from there. And so those signs are someplace around 4 to 5 feet tall, 6 feet, I think, the max.
Okay.
So you're pretty close to that.
As long as
anyway
it's not
where
from the
post
post,
is.
then I guess.
So back on this one, I'm hearing a lot of enthusiasm. So some pictures, some description. I'm hearing more, I think, of reduce it down to maybe just the one or two, to just cover the duplex type situation.
Can you repeat that?
So,
For, what would you do?
so I
in
change
2B?
1A
Or-
to 1 or 2 dwelling units on a property. And then have to think about it or see if you give me any further direction. Then the other one becomes 3 or more. It's just 2 per property per street front. Or it could be 1. But-
I mean, there is not, I don't believe there's an expectation to have a sign in a apartment complex or a condominium complex. I understand what the town is trying to do to give the opportunity, but this is just confusing. I don't know.
So, I can also think of quite a number of up to 4-unit condos in town, which again, my guess is the association isn't really more than the 4-unit owners, although some of them still have some absentee unit owner or common area owner that's not even one of the unit owners. Again, in those situations, seems like it might be beneficial to allow the opportunity for more than one post and board sign. So maybe it's 1 and 2, then 3 and 4 can allow 2, and then from there it's back to just 1 type of deal. Maybe that's what I'll work on.
Some of the subdivisions in town do a great job with having permanent, they're metal tubes. They're very nicely done. The Enclave is a great example. And there's a little complex on Chama. There's several that do that to allow for materials for when properties are for sale, because that they don't allow signs on in the common areas. Anyway.
So this brings us to yard signs. So this is the other place where I've done a similar thing, and based on our discussion we've already had with regard to the post and board signs, can adjust this. Because when you are, well, we can start again where we are in today's code. Right now we allow 1 yard sign per property. The proposal that came from council was to up that to 2. And in considering that and thinking about the different types of districts and what can go on, again, proposed some other modifications. So if, again, I'm in a resident in a duplex and the sign allowance is 2 signs per property, if my neighbor in the other half of the duplex puts out 2 signs for whatever reason, I can't put any on my side of the duplex. Similar thing for a condominium. So it's, again, to be fair to residents in those situations, seemed like it'd be beneficial to make some allowance. Based on our discussion, probably should come down from the 1 to 5 to 1 to 2 or 3, something in that range, rather than going up to 5.
Yard signs being temporary
Yes.
and like a open house sign or a garage sale sign would be examples.
That's some of the more typical examples. When we get into campaign season, the on-site signs are regulated through this provision. The other political sign thing that causes the most controversy out in the right-of-way is different.
Right.
But this would control that type of thing. Or the other thing they are probably most often used for is, I got my roof repaired by, or, whatever type of sign that you might put in your yard.
Yeah.
But it's really the campaign type signs that probably addresses most often.
If you were a homeowner, I assume you're a homeowner, and you have the urge to put a sign up, how many signs could you put up based upon the definitions of yard signs, A-frame signs, all the variety of signs that we've got? How many could you put on your property?
Today, you put 1 yard sign, 1 post and board per street front, and I could only do an A-frame if I'm having some type of weekend event.
So I have to pick one of those 3?
You could do all 3 at the same time,
So I can put 3 signs up,
for a period of time, yes.
but we don't describe the period of time.
Only for the A-frames with regard to the weekend activity, because those can only be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday between sunrise and sunset.
Would it be prudent somewhere in the ordinances to put, you get to choose one? You can only have one type of sign at a time?
We could certainly look at doing that. Again, your challenge may be, I've got my house for sale, and while I've got it for sale, I'm having a garage sale so I can get rid of a bunch of junk. Or while I've got my home for sale, I've had my roof repaired, and the roofer wanted to put a roofer sign in my yard.
Well, the for sale sign on the residence is one thing. A temporary use permit on the garage sign is another. And you could get that temporary permit because we've talked about being an administrative function, and the roofer's out of luck.
Just as an example of the HOA I live in, that roofer sign can only be in the yard as long as the work is being done on the house. Once it's completed, it goes away. So we may have, I don't know if the MPOA has any regulations, but with all the HOAs, I think it's most likely in their CCNRs. Or you're in the MPOA, correct? I don't know.
Yeah, that's another, anyway. So then shouldn't we make the roofer get a permit? He's getting free advertising, putting it in somebody's backyard, and all the neighbors are seeing it. So that's why he puts it there, so they know who to call.
Yep.
Why shouldn't he pay for it? And I know it's not business friendly to charge a roofer for putting a sign up, but I'm trying to mitigate the number of signs that are going to be in a particular property.
But we have a time frame on temporary signs, correct?
Only again, in the current discussion with regard to residential, the A-frame signs used for the weekend directional, that's the only thing that has a time frame on it.
So do we put a time frame then on temporary?
I think we ought to have timeframes on all types of signs. There shouldn't be this unlimited number of, well, the variety of signs that you can put up and the duration, but we don't have the mechanism to control it yet. So I think where we're going to end up with virtually all of these sections are going to be how we're going to implement time and number.
Sounds like a tough job to maintain. We're making it very complicated.
Well, but on the other hand, you see what is going on now. And it's only going to get worse if we don't do something to at least control it. Be fair, be supportive of businesses, but be fair and reasonable in the approach, and then be able to manage that expectation. And I think that's the challenge. So we can change the wording here, and maybe that I can even understand some of it at that point. But, we got to have the mechanism. So hopefully we get to that point.
Okay. So going on just a little bit with yard signs, so they're allowed only on private property with these exceptions. Residential areas subject to Section D that we'll talk about in a minute. And then in the right-of-way adjacent to commercial or industrial, except on Shea. So it's, again, not allowing them, as I've reworded it here, on Shea at all. It's only the A-frames that could go in the right-of-way on Shea in the commercial areas. Electronic message centers, we had some good discussion about last time, and it's still on the table to eliminate the section if you want to go that way. But if we make changes after listening to the discussion, here's what I'm proposing, is that the only change would be that signs are turned off between 10 and 6. However, you need to understand any changes we make in the code will not be applied to any existing signs, only to new signs.
Is there a mechanism to make that universal?
To make it apply to existing signs? No, they grandfathered in basically under the rules at the time they were permitted.
But don't the people that have the signs have to get an annual renewal on their permits?
No.
It's in perpetuity?
Yes.
Maybe that's what we ought to change. So then when they are renewed, that they have to become compliant with current requirements.
So just for this type of signage, and again, it only applied to any
Also-
new ones that get built. It wouldn't apply to anything existing.
I think all signs ought to have the renewal. I think that it's, I think that most cities have, and maybe I'm mistaken, they have an initial sign permit. But I know that some I've been involved with have had a renewal process, whether it was 1 year, 5 years, but some time frame where they had to update their signs by way of permitting.
I haven't seen that personally, but sure can look for some examples.
I mean, notwithstanding the existing or what would be non-conforming, what's the thought about just prohibiting electronic messaging signs?
That, again, that's certainly an option. There was some good discussion about that last time, and we can go that route.
I mean, I'd be in favor of that, frankly.
I'd be in favor of it, but I think you're opening a can of worms that somebody's going to want one and say that Joe's got one down the street and over here he's got one, and why can't I have one?
Because Peter said he couldn't.
Because I don't like them.
Okay, that works.
This is Toastmasters prep, remember that.
Okay?
So before you, I mean, on that last one, if elimination isn't on the table, then I agree with the on-off.
I think that's easier for us to enforce versus what's in there today.
And we also, I think, somewhere else, we've got the lumens or the lux.
Yeah, that's all, and I just didn't put it back in here. It's in the code itself. None of the rest of that changed. I just put this one change in here. And so another thing that had been presented before was to reduce the change time from 8 seconds to 4 seconds. But I didn't hear support for that, so I didn't include that as a change at this point. So we do have in the current code, and we talked about this a little bit last time, a provision about aggregate temporary sign area. But at least the way it's drafted in the code, it's virtually impossible to enforce. It would maybe become possible again if we did come up with some of the other mechanisms through permitting all types of temporary signs. So we could really know whose sign was there and who got it first, and allow them to be spread out. But certainly the one we have doesn't work, and so we have proposed to just eliminate that. And then restructuring this particular section to cover a little bit better the provisions for signs on undeveloped property. And then this last one is coming back to what we'll call the residential directional signs. And the proposed change is here to increase the number allowed from 3 to 5. The way it was discussed at town council was to, in that second provision, eliminate the provision on the hours as well as the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So this would then allow these residential directional signs to be out on all rights of way except Shea any day of the week, any time of the day. Part of the challenge with that comes is if we do that, we're again, in absence of any other enforcement mechanisms, virtually eliminating our ability to enforce the yard signs and A-frame signs in the right-of-way. At least this way we preserve the ability to eliminate them if they are out too late or put up too early. Because once we say it's okay to put a yard sign in the street right-of-way for this purpose, any yard sign can go in that location for any purpose because we can't read the message. And so this, while we may be okay with garage sale this way, if it says, I pick up junk, we couldn't remove that without something in the code. That's one of the reasons I left the time frame in here. At least in the morning or night, we could send code officers by and pull up any sign that was left. We'll get to your map now, Commissioner Corey. This is the map of the sign-free zones. Currently, during election season, all this gets extra confusing and muddy because even though this says it's a sign-free zone for political signs during political season, if you can put a sign in that location for a garage sale, we can't judge the content. So we're back to potentially allowing the political signs during political seasons in those locations if the garage sale sign is allowed in those locations. So that we dealt with that this last political season. They could have gone up on the weekends in these sign-free zones, but they had to come down at the end of the weekend, and maybe that happened some, but they couldn't just be put out there. But if we get rid of the provision here that only allows them on the weekends and allows them every day of the week, then those sign-free zones, you'd be able to put up your campaign sign during campaign season per state statute. We couldn't enforce it.
Question for you. Actually, it's for Commissioner Dempster. How many signs, directional signs, do we use? Because first off, I don't think 5 is enough for some areas of town. If you went into Sunridge Canyon, Adaro Canyon, back parts, but how difficult would it be to pull a permit for directions, issue a QR code, put it on the sign itself, because somebody already knows where they're going, and then get downloaded directions? I mean, that's what we do for every other application. Why can't we do something like that there and reduce the number of signs, reduce that proliferation, and have the town do the work in conjunction with zoning? So my question is, how many do we have? And then I'm going to go back to John with another question about numbers.
Sure. Well, it is very difficult, as you say. Some of the houses, especially my last, listing in North Heights, it was pretty much impossible to do it with 5. And, you know, personally, I plan open houses ahead of time, so it wouldn't be difficult to get a permit to have signs, but not every, I mean, so to use a QR code, someone would have to be up next to the sign. That, to me, that's not feasible. You know, so you're driving along, you see an open house sign, you stop and you have to use the QR code, is that weird?
No, I'm not clear on
Oh,
that. So
okay.
they already know where they want to go. They saw the listing.
Sometimes.
So it's random
Sometimes
people just driving around?
Absolutely. I ask everyone. Sometimes they're here for their kids' soccer game, or they're coming home from church and they're following signs.
So what percentage of the people that are looking at houses know where they're going? Is it 50/50? Is it 75/25? Would you guess?
It's a hard one to guess. Maybe 50/50.
If you had the opportunity, at least we'd reduce 50% of the signs if you had it on some sort of listing.
You'd still need the signs for that 50% that are following signs
I don't
out for a
disagree with
drive.
that.
Yeah.
I don't disagree that we need something somewhere, but I don't think 5's enough. As anti-sign as I appear to be.
I would be cautious, even though I'd like more. There are companies that hire groups to put out ugly, you know, quantities of ugly neon crazy signs. So you get up past, you know, too many quantity-wise, it would make it worthwhile for these companies to come in and, you know, I could call them and have them sign my property with obnoxious
Please don't do that.
eye-catching sign. Well, you know, I'm just making a point that it could go in the reverse by trying to accommodate those, you know, addresses that are a little further out.
John, do we have any idea of the number of signs and by each type of sign that we're talking about that are in town, whether they're for sale signs, yard signs? We don't have any idea. Is that something that the code enforcement could tell us? So we had some idea. And I'm looking at trying to back into how to get compliance and how to get management, and if it's even possible.
So, Chairman, Commissioner Watts, I could give you some numbers on the numbers of signs they move or relocate over the course of a weekend that are put out inappropriately, but how many total signs there are, I'm not sure how easily we could come up with that type of information.
I assume it's a heavy lift, that there's a lot of signs and zoning is always.
It varies by time of year and so forth, but certainly back during political season, it's a lot more than it is otherwise. But there are times it is quite a chore on the weekend to keep up with them. So, Commissioners, the main things that I have heard this evening are to look at enforcement mechanisms. Again, it's probably some type of permitting system that can help ensure that we would be able to control the number consistent with the types of language that's in the code, to potentially reduce some of the numbers in here. I didn't hear, except for this last discussion, any discussion of increasing any of the numbers. A few things we talked about eliminating. But that's the direction I will take from here to work on the next version.
I think just a little bit of clarification in some of the terminology.
Right.
Is it possible to list some examples? Because I'm thinking about the average resident who wants to have a garage sale, who has no idea that their garage sale signs are covered under the sign ordinance, because they think, I'm just going to put up a couple of signs, you know, Saturday and Sunday and, you know, write it on a cardboard box. And so say they do think, well, let me check. I mean, to search through this ordinance, it's not intuitive. For a garage sale sign, I know it's temporary from, you know, but I don't know that the average person really know where to look.
Chairman, Commissioner, you're right. I doubt somebody getting ready to have a garage sale is going to think, oh, I better go look at the sign code to find out what it is, and would do that. When we adopted the new code a few years ago, we, got some publicity out on it at the time. That's gotten old by now. I don't know if it's even out there anymore. But one of the things that our code officers do first is try to educate people. And the reports I'm getting back is they really, for the most part, don't have as much problem with people putting out the cardboard box type of sign as they used to, because it has become more known in the community what the standard is. They still happen some.
Sure.
And, but probably, particularly once we finish this and get something new out there, it'll be good to do some new education and get some new publicity out on whatever we come up with.
Okay.
Question on code enforcement, and you mentioned 2.5 staff, if you will. That's not their primary duty as far as signs goes. Other code ordinances, my question is, are they just out there on the weekends driving around trying to find what you just discussed, or are they doing this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or?
Sure. Chairman, Vice Chair, back before we had the repeal of the sign ordinance, we did have somebody working each day of the week. And one of the main reasons for that was for sign enforcement, to make sure we had somebody on the weekends out there to enforce the temporary sign provisions. When the code was repealed and then reinstated with limited temporary sign code enforcement, we stopped doing that because we didn't need to, but we'll be moving back into that again. So there are more codes they are working to enforce and violations that they're working on. It's not just signs, but it does become a big part of what they do.
One more suggestion, and this is for zoning, that it's kind of like a parking ticket. If they drive around and they happen to see a garage sale sign, some sign that is not compliant, to be able to not shut down or pick up and confiscate the signs, but to say, here's your envelope, here's the code that you need to comply with, send in your $25, whatever that might be. It might make it easier on code enforcement. It might bring it home easier. It certainly would be in the paper where I got a parking ticket for something that I did, but I wouldn't disrupt the business and I wouldn't disrupt the resident for something that they weren't aware of. And if there were multiple infractions, we'd keep track of that. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, but I don't want to make it more onerous on somebody that's having an innocent garage sale or even businesses, as much as just to manage that process and help rather than hinder.
Yes, Chairman, Commissioner, yes, that's sort of the approach that they take, particularly for people that are doing it on an infrequent basis. A lot of times, if a sign just needs to be moved a few feet, they'll just move the sign. If it's a little bit more than that, they'll go to the property owner and say, hey, here's the information about the code and what you can do, can't do, these you need to go take care of. Or sometimes they'll bring them back to them and say, you need to find a new location, whatever. And it's only when it gets a little bit more egregious, so they get some of the repeat offenders where they just take the sign and move on into potential other enforcement mechanisms.
I have one more question about Section 15, vehicle signs.
Yes.
So this states that if there's a vehicle or a truck that has the business signage displayed, they shall not remain in the same parking space for more than 48 hours.
Yes.
Has that always been in there? In our ordinance?
In this code, I can't recall what we had in the code before this one with regard to this.
Okay. All right.
I think you got to have longer than 48 hours. Service trucks that park Friday night, they get cited come Sunday night before they get out of their driveway. I think you got to have at least 72 hours.
Yeah.
That's too
Or if
tight.
they're, what, well, I'm not sure. It says if, let's see, business or commercial vehicles displaying signage or advertising as a normal part of business activity may be parked in an off-street parking space adjacent to the business to which the vehicle relates as far from the public right-of-way as possible. If the vehicle is visible from the public right-of-way, it shall not remain in the same parking space for more than 48 hours. So this is parked at the business, not at their home. I don't know.
I mean, I think if it's adjacent to the business.
I'm just like thinking all the delivery,
I mean, the example would be, Eric Batchelor's got his barbecue joint, he's got a mobile food truck. He parks the food truck adjacent to the business. To me, that can sit there indefinitely. It's just an extension of the business, so to speak. But if you're talking about parking that same food truck out on Shea and Saguaro in the MCO parking lot for everybody to see, I think that's a different scenario. So I think there's an adjacency piece to that makes it, that covers what you're asking for in the 72 hours, give or take, versus the intent of this, which is to avoid leveraging that for advertisement out and away from the business, right?
I'd agree with you, and but I do think that in the case of the barbecue place, does he have to get a permit for his truck if he's going to sit there? The way the codes read, or the way the codes will ultimately read.
So if it's parked back, as I assume it is, behind the business in the Plat 208 parking lot, and it's not along the street, we don't care.
Okay? Then I think I'd stick with the 72 hours because I think that's 48 hours is just too tight, particularly for service vehicles that are poster boarded all over their trucks now.
So, so if something's being stored versus parked, it should be in a screened yard and not in a parking place anyway.
Yeah, this is the public parking,
Right.
so.
And so it sounds like they're storing it for the weekend and it should be someplace besides the parking lot anyway.
No objection to adjusting that to 72. So commissioners, I think we're looking for a motion to continue, John?
To August?
Yeah,
We have a meeting in August.
I know we had some discussion about who was going to be here in different months, and we maybe need to go all the way to September. I won't be ready in July. I know we have 2 members going to be gone in August. 2 gone, so I think, I don't know, maybe we need to go to September.
Is there any expectation on the part of council for when to return it?
They were looking to have it back in April or May of, so.
And what happens in the interim? It seems to me that it's gotten worse. Are people taking more and more advantage of it, and there's nothing we can do about the blight?
Again, initially, the council, when they reinstated the ordinance, wanted to take a limited enforcement of temporary signs. I think some of the council has seen some concerns with that, and we've been asked to step it up some and go back closer to what the code is. There was discussion about having it on the council meeting next week for the council to reconsider that, because the discussion back in February, I think it was, when they had this, was a little bit confusing and hard to know exactly what they wanted. So we may see that. Again, I'm not sure it's actually going to be on next week or not. But we are starting to do a little bit more enforcement of temporary signs because that has become a concern. So, Chair, again, up to you and the commissioners, knowing we have at least 2 that won't be here in August. My suggestion would be September, but it's up to you.
okay. I'll go ahead and make the motion to continue agenda item 6, ordinance 2304, to the September venue of the Zoning Commission. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
7-0. September 11th,
Thank you, Paula.
Monday, September 11th.
All right, discussion and requests from research to staff, commissioners. Number 8, commission requests from the Development Services Director.
I'll be working on a sign ordinance, some more. We always, we should maybe someday amend our agenda, because we always do 8 and 9 kind of together. As far as other items coming up, we do have a request for a special use permit that will probably be ready for your August agenda. Farhad, are you familiar with anything else that may be on that at this point? No. So we'll see how that goes. Otherwise, we may not even have to have the August meeting at all. But if we do, that would be the purpose of it, be for that special use permit.
Okay. Adjourned? Thanks, John.